very good afternoon to all of you. This has been an enlightening journey of 2.5 decades of making Indian schools inclusive and accepting towards learners with disabilities. Inclusion, the way forward. Let's start with some pertinent questions. Does inclusion benefit only learners with disabilities? Does it impact our society at large? And how difficult is it for educational institutes to become inclusive? Actually, every school, college, university can become inclusive, provided it is planned systematically and done with passion. Schools need to change, universities need to change in order to make our society more inclusive. What are the statistics that are there in front of us? With more than 15 lakh schools in India, less than 30% of our schools are actually inclusive. That is, they provide accessible education to persons with disabilities. We thought of inclusion way back in 1948 with our directive principles talking of inclusion. Moving on, in 1986, our National Educational Policy also spoke of inclusion. In 2001, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan gave us plans to bring in more learners with diverse needs. And of course, the 2020 NEP, National Education Policy, has laid out very good programs for inclusion and equity. Why then is inclusion still not happening in our schools? Because inclusion is a very complex and multifaceted process involving a lot of stakeholders, teachers, school principals, school management, peers, and the community at large. It also requires time, money, action, energy, planning, policies, and above all, an attitude to embrace diverse learners. Budget, of course, is a huge thing that schools need to keep aside to make inclusion happen. So, in my years of work, I started assessing the IQ of schools, the inclusive quotient, because unlike our regular intelligence quotient, inclusive quotient can definitely be increased and it can benefit so many more people. What exactly is IQ? It is all about planning, implementing, and sustaining inclusion. First and foremost, the school needs to set aside a budget because they need to have a department of special educators. We need to have inclusive policies. Schools nowadays have all kinds of policies, anti-bullying policy, policy for safety of children, policies for STEM, policy for sports. But when we are assessing the inclusive quotient, we are sad to see that there are no policies on inclusion. So, beginning with standard operating procedures, schools can focus on one or the other category of disability, because in India today, as per the Rights of Persons with Disability Act, we have 21 disabilities, and it would be very difficult for schools to focus on all the categories. So start small, start focusing on the category of disability that teachers and students can help to include, and then grow. And then is to plan accessible infrastructure. We find that there are students with disabilities who have entered the school but do not have accessible toilets, accessible auditoriums, accessible libraries, accessible playground, because inclusion actually means everything. It's not just studying together. Every student who walks into the school wants to be a part of the community, wants to be a part of everything the school has to offer. Education, sports, friendship, fun, everything has to be planned. And then, of course, the most important aspect is capacity building of teachers. Teachers play a very important role in making inclusion happen. In my experience, I have seen that teachers are more than happy to help all learners, provided they know what has to be done, provided they get ample support, and they are appreciated for their efforts. So capacity building of teachers and collaborating with special educators is definitely important for inclusion to happen. Next step is, of course, to implement and monitor whether what we have planned is working or not. It's okay to make mistakes. It is okay to start small, review, and build on our success. And slowly you will see that the inclusive quotient of the school is slowly increasing. So I advise schools to start small at the primary level by taking in all students, no rejection policy, making equitable and inclusive environment, the least restrictive environment where students feel free to study, to make mistakes, and overcome the hurdles that they are facing, and of course, empowering teachers at the primary level. Once the school is comfortable at the primary level, the school can start planning at the middle school level, once again empowering the teachers, making curriculum accessible, and then we move on to the high school, where the school needs to offer curriculum which is based on vocation or skill-based curriculum. A very interesting fact that we see abroad in the European countries and in the US, these are developed nations, and more than 50% of students opt for vocational studies or career and technical education as it is called there. In a country like India, which is developing and which has so much diversity, unfortunately, less than 3% of students opt for vocational curriculum. Why is that? Again, that is due to the stigma attached. There is a paradox here, because when we want our students to succeed academically in schools, once they move beyond the school, we expect the students to take on vocational subjects like law, BBA, medical, engineering. In today's times, when we hear children saying, I would like to study pure physics or pure mathematics, they would say, what is the viability for your employment? But offering vocational subjects at the school level somehow seems to be a huge hurdle. So again, mindsets need to change. Once we offer vocational subjects to children at the school level, and I mean all children, we can then move on to inclusive universities where students with disabilities can go for higher education. The next question is, why would any school invest so much? What is their return? Here I would like to tell you a story. Sri and Ravi were two students pursuing their engineering in a reputed engineering college. And like all youngsters, they decided to go on a bike trip. Unfortunately, they met with an accident, and it was deadly for both of them. Sri lost the use of his limbs, and Ravi lost his vision. When they got to know about this, both youngsters were terribly dejected. Over a period of time, Sri went into depression and dropped out of college. And we don't know what happened to him. What happened to Ravi? Ravi had studied in an inclusive school. He knew of screen reading software. He had been exposed to children who were visually impaired but had completed school and had gone on to complete their higher education. So he made it a point to find out how to equip himself to continue his studies. He completed his education, got his degree, opened his own firm, and now he employs as many people with visual impairment as possible. Why did Ravi do that? Because he was in an inclusive school. He knew that there is life beyond disability. He knew that even people with disabilities can study, succeed, and lead a life of dignity. So, the impact of inclusion actually helps all learners to develop flexibility and resilience. It's long-lasting. It also helps students to celebrate diversity. We often talk of value education in schools, and I think an inclusive school is the best environment to teach values to all learners. With inclusive education, the persons with disabilities can also seek employment, and it will have a wonderful effect on our economy. Instead of being liabilities on the state, they would be contributing members of the society and would be able to lead a life of dignity. So, to conclude, inclusive education in schools can lead to inclusive education in higher institutions, and this will lead to a dignified life for all members of the society, and most important, a peaceful and a very progressive society for all. So together we all move forward, and inclusion is the way forward. Thank you.